Hello everyone and welcome to my patch 8.7 rundown. My name is Phreak and we're going to be going over all the things that are happening in 8.7 and my thoughts on it and what's not in it and everything else. Let's get into the patch. First things first, as we can see, the Aurelia rework is coming in the 8.7 patch. I want to point out important timelines for professional play. Obviously, all of us could be playing this in our own games at home. No big deal. 8.7 is coming out very soon. For pro play, though, North America and Europe's finals will remain on 8.5. LPL and LCK and a whole bunch of other regions will be remaining on 8.6. 8.7, to my knowledge, has 0 competitive regions that it's played in. MSI will be on 8.8. So basically consider this patch a reaction to 8.5, a slight potential warm-up into mid-season, where one of the major goals is more roles, as in types of champions, can carry from more positions. And we might see some of that in 8.8, 8.9, 8.10. And then basically it's again a reaction to pro play in 8.5. Keep in mind that as of this patch, even just coming out right now, there's been exactly 3 LCK games on 8.6. So there is no footage at all that you can react to 8.6 because NA and EU haven't played there at all. There are a bunch of other regions like LATAM North and South and a couple of others. I think Turkey and Russia are playing on 8.6 in their postseason as well. And you can debate whether or not that's valuable or not. But basically what I'm saying is there is almost no pro play in 8.6 yet that the Riot design team can really react to. However, by the time 8.8 rolls around and they make that patch, they will have a decent amount of footage they can watch to potentially gear up for MSI. But I wouldn't expect a lot of other changes aimed at pro play anymore. Basically, whatever pro play looks like, it's going to look like for basically the rest of the spring split into MSI. I don't expect a lot of other big changes after this patch. So, okay, let's get into the game. It's time to esport. Aurelia rework looks really cool. There's a champion spotlight out on it. There's, I'm sure, plenty of people out there giving their opinions and whatnot. Feel free to watch those videos. They all generally do a good job, but it really looks really fun. I'm excited for it. I'm going to play her a lot when she comes out. I'm pretty excited about this. Okay. So I'm actually going to skip Gragas because I'm going to go alphabetically. Elise is getting some small buffs. Some context on Elise is Elise has typically been a champion that has sat below 50% win rate in solo queue and yet been a mainstay of the competitive jungle. And that could be that it was metagame reliant. That could have been people were Elise mains and just wanted to just stick onto playing the champion and refuse to get off even if there's a better champion out there. I think some of that like inertia is true for pro play. But either way, some nice minor buffs to Elise, 10 flat damage on Spider Q, not human Q, as well as 2 seconds off the cooldown of Cocoon for basically the entire game. Here's the numbers real quick right there. Q damage is up 17% in the early game, 5% in the mid to late game. Cooldown is certainly pretty substantially better because of, again, the fact that you're not going to put another point into it until level 14, meaning that it's basically a flat 2-second cooldown reduction on Cocoon, pretty much period, which is really useful. And at least being a generally considered early game champion, right? Ganking is her major power. Having more cocoons, having more damage on your Q, even at rank 1, really pretty meaningful. I think this will raise Elise maybe 1% or more win rate, put her very close to 50% in solo queue, and I think she should be good enough to be played in pro. I'm not sure exactly why pros aren't playing this champion right now. I am far from a competitive jungler, but it feels like Elise should be in the state where she should be playable as an early game bully. When you're against things like Zac that just get a bit low in the jungle, can have a hard time. I understand partially Elise is kept down by super fast clearing junglers like Skarner and Olaf that just shred through their jungle and she can't do much about it. That's not really going to change, but if you intend to get early ganks off instead of playing the who can race for farm faster, That's what you can do here. All right, let's move on. Enough time spent here. Gragas getting AP ratio and such buffs. I want to point out math-wise, by the way, that Gragas' best role as far as solo queue is win rate with like an almost 48% win rate, which isn't too bad. In the jungle in solo queue is at like 44 right now because pros just refused to stop playing Gragas, and he kept getting nerfed and nerfed and nerfed. At this point, tank Gragas is the weakest Gragas. Even in solo queue, I'm pretty sure the stats suggest that just going Runic Echoes is almost just better at this point, and just playing AP Gragas, and I think especially more so now. I think I'm going to make the prediction that if we see Gragas at all in pro play, it will be Runic Echoes Gragas, which I know sounds a little bit zany, but they just probably should be. And I don't know if people are going to actually make that choice. I don't know if people are going to really realize that Runic Echoes Gragas is not a trap, but they did before, back in the day, before Cinderhulk was any good. Everyone started Runic Echoes and then built their tank from there. We could see it again. Anyway, I did some new things as far as math's concerned. You're going to see some new ornamentation as far as whatnot. And so what I did here is basically I said, okay, if you're going to play Gragas the way that you're going to play Gragas' patch, which is AP Gragas in the mid lane, you're going to start with a Doran's Ring, probably, and you're going to start with runes, which is about 30 ability power at level 1. If it's not exactly 30, it's close enough, who cares? And because it's an AP ratio increase, I decided to make columns for 100, 300, and in a insane max level build, 1000 AP. 1000 is basically impossible, but it can happen, so I chose to include it as the extreme in the far end. So it's basically a 3% damage increase when you just walk to lane. I mean, just the fact that the AP ratio went up by 0.1, it does 3 more damage. It's a 3% damage increase just when you walk to lane, which is, you know, non-trivial. It doesn't suck. If you run sorcery secondary and stuff as a jungler, you're still going to get some of this ability power, and you get a bit out of that one. At 100 AP, 300 AP, 1000 AP, you're going to see it's a, you know, it exists as a damage increase at, you know, the 7 to 12% mark, whatever. Cool. Drunken Rage gets a massively increased ability power ratio. By the way, also deals damage based on target's max health. And it has some damage reduction as well. So here's the W damage buff. Again, with 30 ability power, this is looking at, let's say you're hitting another Gragas with the ability. Deals about 300 damage by the end of the game. But as you get farther and farther in and you build more ability power, it can actually be a pretty substantial damage increase. The ability can do 25% or so more damage with a 300 AP build, which, you know, seems reasonable. So, hey, it's a 20-something% damage increase in the late game on the ability overall. That feels pretty good. If you build full tank, of course, it means almost nothing, but hey, 25% more damage or something, pretty solid. And finally, the damage reduction actually has an AP ratio as well. Keep in mind that 4% per 100 AP means it's 40% more damage reduction at 1000 AP. 1000 is obviously, again, the obnoxiously high, practically impossible mark. But let's talk about this. Here's the damage reduction ratio, right? So the damage reduction in 8.6 was going to be this. In 8.7 with 30 AP, it's 1.2% higher, which puts you at about 1% more durable than before. If you have 100 AP, you're about 5% more durable than before. 300 AP, you're about 15% more durable than before. And at the very end of the game, if you have 1000 AP, the ability is about twice as good. As far as how much damage you're taking compared to before. Instead of taking 82% damage, you're taking about 52% damage, which means you're about twice as durable as before. That's how the math works out. It lines up. Trust me, the math is there. I'm pretty confident I did the numbers right. All right. So, hey, that's cool. We talked about Elise already. Hecarim getting a minor buff. He is 50% stronger on the W healing. Keep in mind that W healing to monsters is still capped, and you very frequently cap your healing input in the jungle, so his jungle clear should not be any safer. But he can drain tank in team fights more, which means he is more of a snowbally champion. And this is the kind of thing where you typically wouldn't see the champ show up in pro because pros don't typically like unreliable results. Unless just Hecarim gets to the point where he just is strong and no one feels like his weak games ever happen. And in which case, then he, you know, jumps over the hump and now he's in every single game. I doubt that, but hey, Hecarim is tankier in team fights, the amount of which, really hard to say, but cool to see. Buffs to Ivern. Ivern definitely is a bit of a weak performer, under 50% win rate in solo queue, and considering that Ivern is almost always been like a pretty nuts champion, that's a pretty rough win rate to have. So, hey, he gets to scout brush again more easily, queuing over walls a bit easier. Daisy has better AI. I know the designer is still trying to test out passive changes to make it either cost less health or to grow the grove faster. That might happen in 8.8 or 8.9 or something. If it's found out that he even needs it, maybe this is actually a big buff overall, but this should still be pretty nice. This will have a non-trivial impact in Iron's win rate, but I expect to not see him in pro play, so I don't expect to see Iron in MSI. Karthus gets 10 more base damage on his Q. And once again, because I want to do my math properly, I will include AP ratio and everything as well. How much does this really matter for his Q? Well, it turns out in the early game, still a very big deal for his early landing phase. Even with 30 ability power, it's still a 20% damage hike, which is really substantial. So his landing phase is absolutely much stronger. And Karthus right now, by the way, is at like a 50.5% win rate in top lane. It's only a 3,500 game sample, but that's actually pretty solid. He's a 49% win rate mid laner in solo queue and Plat Plus. Like, this is pretty solid. Karthus is a playable champion in general, and this buff will be really quite big for his laning phase, for his pushing power, for his early dueling, if it so happens. Pretty substantial. You get up to the mid game with 100 ability power, you finish one completed item. It's still about a 6.5% damage increase, 7% damage increase. And even by late game, it still does matter to a certain degree, 5, 2%, something around there. Hey, it matters. This 10 damage, which is 20 if it doubles. It's meaningful. So Karthus, I think, will gain enough to be above 50% win rate in both roles, is my guess. Kayn getting some hidden math updates to his passive. The goal is probably that he transforms sooner. I'm not sure. Maybe it's power neutral, but that said, Kayn is underperforming. He's at about 47.5% win rate in solo queue as a jungler, so could definitely gain some love, and I would expect this to give some love. This will also matter a bit as well. You can actually queue up Q into W or Q into R, and that is nice to see. That's pretty meaningful. Leona is actually the number 10 support in pro play in 8.5. 11% presence, a bit sub 50 in solo queue, but not by much. And now her default stat for adaptive when you go sorcery or domination secondary is going to be attack damage instead of ability power. I'm assuming that the math works out. This is more damage, but I don't know for certain. There's a chance it actually ends up nerfing the champion. I don't know for sure, but I'll remain hopeful. Leona could be buffed. I don't think she needs it severely, so whatever. Everyone loves to complain about Lux. Oh my gosh, Riot, how could you ever give her better cooldown? This is going to be... Stop. This complaint happened last time with Lux, and nothing happened. All right? Just no. Lux is certainly a passable champion. I don't actually think she needs buffs, but I also don't think this is going to make her obscene, so whatever. More R resets, more fun. Here's the math. I plugged in the base cooldown of the ability and then plugged in the reset itself. It said, okay, well, her R on a reset was 72, then 46, and 25. Now it's 56 and 39 to 25. Here is the cooldown difference on the far right side of the column. Yeah, it matters, but at the same time, at what point is this transition of an extra 16 seconds going to make a difference? It's clearly not going to come up a second time in a team fight. Even with a bunch of CDR, it's probably not going to happen. So maybe it's back up for another all-in in lane. I guess when your opponent comes back, this can help Lux be a bit more of an aggressor and abuser in lanes. Not that Lux really is normally. The level 11 through 15 mark, this starts to get into you actually get 2 ults in a team fight territory, and I'm okay with that. I think Lux getting to ult is one of the coolest parts of the champion. I think it's way more interesting than E-poke and fishing for Qs from Fog of War. So I am totally happy if Final Spark is a bigger part of Lux's power budget. I'm cool with that. That sounds fun. Next up, buffs to Malphite. His attack damage growth goes up, his E ability power ratio goes up, and his R cooldown at ranks 2 and 3 gets better. Well, here's Malphite's attack damage. Goes up to 130, which feels pretty appropriate for a somewhat auto-attack focused tank. He does have incentives to auto-attack with his W. Keep in mind that part of the way he deals auto-attack damage is with his W active, which has a bunch of extra damage and ratios on it as well. So when he's actually punching you, this 9% damage increase is not really going to be accurate because, again, there's just more important places to deal damage, which is with his W active. So this is a not very important buff to his attack damage, but hey, I don't mind him having 130 at level 18. That seems reasonable to me. Here is the E ability power ratio. Keep in mind that E has a base damage as well as an armor ratio. There was someone in the Reddit thread about these buffs that did the math comparing Frozen Heart to Rod of Ages, and essentially you could spend the same amount of money and Frozen Heart will give you the same amount of damage to your E that a Rod of Ages would. Now they do other different things, and Malphite has other ability power ratios, such as to his Q and to his R, etc., etc. There's other math to be concerned about, but this just means that E is the same ability in an AP-focused build compared to in an armor-focused build in the rough state. So here's the math, basically. You can see a 30 AP E goes up to 270 base damage. This counts, by the way, W existing but being maxed last, but Granite Shield not being on. Granite Shield, I believe, is the name of his passive, which triples the value his W gives in armor, so we're not counting that. We're not counting any armor items, which maybe we should at some point, but whatever. Anyway, what it comes down to is, hey, he does some more damage, and eventually the E does twice as much damage as it would before, courtesy of AP ratios, because let's be real, point to AP is a garbage ratio. And even though the ratio is tripled, the base damage only ever doubles, even at 1,000 ability power. Math. Cool. Unstoppable Force, of course, a nice cooldown buff. There's the numbers. From levels 11 onwards, it's of course better. Down to 80 seconds is a pretty fast ultimate. This puts Malphite in really aggressive ult territory. As a champion, he sits at 50% win rate in top lane, so, and that's in Plat Plus, where players are actually pretty decent. So, yeah, I expect Malphite to be considered a strong top laner. One thing I do want to point out is Malphite seems to lose every tank versus tank duel in the game. He seems to be able to run out of mana. He wants to build armor for his damage, but most of the tanks deal magic damage. Malphite loses tank versus tank, but he is generally pretty good in tank versus fighter. So if we see more Camille, and even with things like Conqueror, where Conqueror innately is worth armor pen, etc., at a certain point, Malphite just slows your attack speed and goes no, and can survive the matchup, potentially better than champions like Sion or Shen could. And I'm not sure exactly, but there is a world where Malphite survives those lanes better than the other tanks, and is still very good at saying, we're going for the engage, let's follow up. Will we see Malphite in pro? Probably not, but that's probably because players aren't going to try, not because he's not viable, in my opinion. Another minor buff to Nocturne. What's funny is the context here I'm kind of sad about. It's like the Duskblade changes hit Nocturne harder than we expected, which is very confusing because the math was very easy to do, that the ult was never going to do more damage than Duskblade. So I'm a little miffed that they got this wrong. That said, Nocturne is fine. He's actually pretty reasonable in solo queue, 51% win rate. In pro play, he actually still exists. Number 9 jungler in pro, but pro is very top heavy with their jungle picks. This is 8.5 stats, by the way. 8.6 is when the Duskblade and stuff happened. Either way, though, on 8.6 in solo queue, he's completely reasonable. That said, 5 attack damage in Duskbringer means almost nothing. Here's his total attack damage before and after. Whatever, it's 5 higher on the Duskblade trail. It's going to bump him up like 0.5%. I mean, his jungle clear going to be a little bit better, I guess, in the early game. You look at the 6% higher AD at level 1 and 2. Yeah, okay, that's his jungle clear. Whatever. Unless it hits some kind of breakpoint where he one-shots Raptors, which I heavily doubt, this is basically almost irrelevant. A very minor love tap to Olaf R. Surprisingly to me, I didn't realize this, he is actually the number 1 jungler in pro play at 8.5. 87% presence. He's the number 2 champion overall in pro play. And the number 1 jungler by a lot, actually, by quite a bit. And it's actually reasonable that Olaf gets nerfed. Now, he is, unfortunately, for the rest of us plebs, a little bit sub 50 in solo queue, but not by much. It's at basically 49%, which means he's within reason to be nerfed. I think it's okay. There's 2 columns to look at. One is how much his haste is actually nerfed in terms of his total movement speed. It is 80 or 91% as fast as before, which is not the sledgehammeriest of nerfs. And then I did the math as well alongside Predator, which is a flat, I think it's 35%. I did the actual numbers, but I've forgotten them in my mind now. Either way, it is a bit less of a nerf when you have Predator on. Also, one thing to keep in mind is diminishing returns definitely exist, especially with hastes this strong. So in the real world, the actual amplification and loss is even further shrunk towards it being irrelevant. I do not expect this to push Olaf off of number 1 in pro play at all. I don't think pros will really notice, especially because pre-6 it is unaffected and 16 plus is unaffected. So it's only the 6 through 15 that matters. And even then, not by a lot. I don't expect Olaf to go anywhere outside of number 1 in pro play still. Okay. Next champion up is Quinn. Quinn is actually doing quite well. She's got a very high win rate in top lane, 54% according to Lolalytics. Also, she is not a highly mastered champion. She is on the lower half in terms of like ranking how many games have been played on this champion. She's down here in terms of like it's mostly novices, and she's smashing. Quinn is pretty much definitely a dumb top laner right now. If you want Freelo, play Quinn. Either way, some nice buffs and bug fixes. I've ran into this one before. It would sometimes fail to reactivate, which didn't deal any Sky Strike damage or any marking or whatnot. Sometimes it could fail to cast. Sometimes it would just do weird stuff. But this won't really be a lot of big power upgrades. Technically it exists, but they're going to be small. Ultimately, Quinn is still going to be pretty dumb, and I think we should actually nerf the champion. Excuse me. All right, next up is Rengar. Rengar is definitely a little bit weak. He's about 48% in jungle right now. He's 49% in top, but he's actually heavily mastered in top. So Rengar has actually got an inflated top lane win rate because it's almost all Rengar mains that play Rengar top. Rengar top mains playing Rengar top. So Rengar certainly can use the buffs, even though his win rate is within, like, I think, passable margins in general. So 3 attack damage. It exists. There you go. 5 to 3% more attack damage. Going up to 119 at max level is pretty reasonable. Seems about right, so that's fine with me. Yeah, he will remain a slightly weak for the average player champion, which is fine because Rengar is frustrating with a head, and I think Rengar, in my opinion, is allowed to be on the weak side while still being a fulfilling champion for mains. Unlike Shaco's with a victim complex, where their champion is overtuned and they complain about it. So I don't know what to tell you. Shaco mains are snowflowers. Snowflowers, snowflakes. Shaco mains are snowflakes. We'll get to that in a little bit. Rumble getting actually some substantial buffs, actually. Rumble definitely a little bit weak. He's a 47% win rate top laner in Plat Plus. That is a bit on the low side, especially because Rumble tends to be played mostly by Rumble mains. In general, he tends to be a higher mastery champion. So being on the low side is pretty awkward. This damage increase is really substantial. So here is, we're just going to look at the base damage, 8.6 to 8.7. It is a 30% damage increase at rank 1, which definitely means a lot. It means a lot. It really, really does. And as my brain works, I will get more information out there. Laning phase matters, so that's really cool. I plugged in the numbers based on the minion damage dealt as well, and it means that he is still doing amplified damage to minions as well. So that's really, really nice to see. Even with 30 ability power, and this ability does have a very generous ability power ratio on it, you are still getting a pretty substantial bump. Keep in mind that the AP ratio and the max rank damage are unchanged, so from level 9 onwards, nothing matters anymore. He's the same champion, but the first 8 levels are substantially better. One thing I also want to point out, provided I'm reading this properly, the damage cut down is only to minions. It is not to monsters. So this giant base damage increase, this right here, affects his jungle. And Rumble is definitely a very weak jungler right now. So I like seeing Rumble jungle. I think it's a really fun champion. It's a really compelling playstyle. He does interesting things out of the jungle. I am happy to see it exist, and considering the first 4 levels are the most important part for a jungler before you finish Runic Echoes, substantial buffs to his jungle clear, which I am very, very happy about. So cool, Rumble getting some well-deserved buffs. This will probably be a 2% win rate increase and like a 3% win rate to the jungle. Sejuani is the number 2 jungler in pro play, 68% presence across 6.5, which is again the pro patch for playoff patch for most regions, but not all. And there's basically no data on 8.6. She is sadly a sub 50 win rate solo queue champion, 48.5. Such is life. But pretty substantial nerfs to health growth, pretty substantial nerfs to mid to late game stun duration. Here's the health. It's down 120 by level 18. It matters, it exists, right? It's down 7 HP per level, which eventually comes true by the end of it all. Maybe it's going to mean another level where you can't quite finish your Cinderhulk, or not Cinderhulk, but your Warmog's armor or whatever. But I mean, okay, this exists. This will nerf her win rate. She'll be a little bit less tanky. The E stun duration, I want to point out, again, does not matter until level 8 because you max it second. But from levels 8 through 13 onwards, of course, it gets worse and worse and worse. Even at level 8 and 9, only losing out on 0.15 seconds, not the end of the world. This does affect the champion, but her early game is basically unaffected. Sejuani's first 7 levels are basically the same champion in stun duration, and even in max HP, she's down like 34 health. Yes, 34 health can matter, but let's be real, this means almost nothing. So her early game is unaffected. Her late game is definitely weaker. This will be enough to make people reconsider how much they want to play Sejuani. This will definitely affect her in solo queue. She will remain sub 50. This will probably drop her a bit down in the pro play tier list, but will still be a frequently seen tank jungle. Next up is a Snowflake champion in Shaco. I looked up some numbers, by the way, to see if it really was only Shaco mains playing Shaco, and there is some degree of truth, but I looked up jungle mastery tables from champion.gg, and he is number 10. Lee Sin is above that. Riven, weirdly, is above that. Like Riven jungle, there are some of them out there. But yeah, certainly Shaco has some level of mains out there, but keep in mind, Lee Sin, for example, is like the number 2 like highest mastery score jungle champion. Like people who play Lee Sin in the jungle are players who play a lot of Lee Sin in the jungle. And Shaco's on that spectrum on kind of the high side, but like Lee Sin destroys him in that regard, and Lee Sin is sub 50. Like Lee Sin is actually a weak champion propped up by people who are good at the champion. Shaco's just actually dumb. And they're going to be like, but my early game's not good enough, but my late game's not good enough, but I lose games to Kha'Zix. Shaco and Kha'Zix have the same mastery score, basically. And Shaco's like 3% win rate higher. Shaco mains are as frequent as Kha'Zix mains. And Shaco has a 3% higher win rate. Stop whining about other assassin junglers. You're just wrong. And let's talk about deceive nerfs. Basically, a flat damage nerf to the empowered Q. It still has the 10 to 50 extra damage based on rank that came in at 8.6, but the bonus attack damage ratio definitely goes down by about half. Also, something that I think is really, really cute, actually. I like this as a nerf to Shaco the champion, is that you actually have to land your auto attack right within exiting invisibility, or you don't get the bonus damage or the refund. This is good to me. And what's nice, though, is I'm glad this came out after there was an incentive to put real points into Q, because Deceive's stealth duration ranks up with ranks in Q, right? And if you're stuck on rank 1 Q, you can never get anything out of it because you don't do any damage and you don't get the refund, and you're not invisible for any time. And so now that you actually have a reason to go 3 to 5 points in Q early, you're at least invisible long enough to reliably get this stab. This would have been a shitty change if it was still Emax. But now that Qmax is viable, I'm glad this change comes in. I would not have liked this if it wasn't for the Q buffs that made you actually want to put points in Q. All right, anyway, this is going to be a really substantial nerf to Shaco, though. This is a really big deal. This matters some as well, and let's do the numbers. So the first thing we're going to look at is the AD ratio nerf. And so I'm going to say, okay, let's say you have 10 attack damage. What did it used to do? What does it do now? Okay, 3 to 2% less damage. Not the end of the world. Okay, what about 100 attack damage, bonus attack damage? What about 300 bonus attack damage? And the ability does like 10 to like, in super endgame, 15% less damage. Like with gigantic amounts of attack damage. If you are insanely fed with all 3 lethality items and a Bloodthirster and Ravenous Hydra, there's your 300 bonus attack damage. And it's a 15% damage cut. And not even that, really. I mean, you can't have 300 bonus AD at level 2. You're going to be, down here at level 16 or whatever. It's a 13% damage cut. So even though the ratio got cut by half, it itself is an auto attack and everything else. So it's 13% less damage in the super endgame scenarios, which means this damage cut is not quite as big as it looks like on paper. This, however, is a pretty big nerf, and this is going to substantially drop Shaco's win rate. He's going to be, instead of like 54, Like 51. This is going to drop him a lot, I really do think. Maybe I'm overstating it. Maybe he won't lose that much, but I feel like this is a pretty big hit to Shaco. And what I also wanted to do is compare, because I was very outspoken how 8.6 were over buffs to Shaco. They overcompensated for Duskblade. And so I went back and I said, okay, what if this was the change from the beginning? What if we look at 8.5 Shaco and now 8.7 Shaco? And so what I did is I said, okay, with this column here, right, here's your old Q damage, here's your new Q damage, with the bonus damage, with the AD ratio, look how much more damage the Q does, yeah, no duh. But I said, okay, to be fair though, how much damage were you losing if you're still rushing Duskblade and you lose out on a lot of that Duskblade proc damage? And I subtract that from the bonus damage Q is dealing, and we get this table right here where your damage at a completed Duskblade with no runes, with no other items, with nothing else, is weaker. It does not inherently, intrinsically, by itself, compensate for Duskblade. However, the bonus attack damage needed to buff that damage and get back on track is 8 to 20, and even at the very, very end game at level 18, as Duskblade scales, is another 120, not counting Duskblade. There are basically no worlds in which you don't hit this damage breakpoint. Maybe around here, like level 9, you've like finished your Duskblade, but you haven't yet gotten to pick up another longsword yet. You know, level 10, you've picked up 1 longsword. Here you're on 2 longswords. Here you finish your serrated dirk. Here you've finished Yomu's Ghostblade. Okay, now you're at 55 out of the 58. But keep in mind, runes still exist and whatnot. So this ends up being, as long as you're willing to Q max on Shaco, which I realize not everyone is excited about. But if you're willing to Q max on Shaco, the 8.7 damage numbers are basically equivalent / in the real world slightly buffed compared to old Duskblade Shaco at 8.5. Now he still gets hit with this nerf here where the Deceive is not going to trigger for the damage and cooldown reduction nearly as much, and he's going to be hit by the fact that your second Duskblade off your clone is not going to be as good either. Those are all things that are actual nerfs. I think at the end of the day, Shaco is probably a slightly weaker champion than he was in 8.5. But I still maintain Shaco was overpowered in 8.5 and could do with small tuning down. Keep in mind that I'm going to get attacked by Shaco mains saying, oh, but how dare you talk about, you just hate assassins. I just talked about how I was happy Rengar got buffed. You check yourself. All right, next up is Swain. Swain is the #1 champion in all of pro play. 94% presence in 8.5 across the top 5 regions. Swain is the #1 champion in pro. Lots of bans, lots of picks. Also, a 53% win rate champion in solo queue. This guy is real strong. They added a bunch of usability to his W, E, and R, which honestly I'm pretty happy about. You can reliably land your abilities. That's all pretty cool. So they nerfed the Q a fair bit of damage. Let's go into the numbers here. All right, once again, I assume you start with a Doran's Ring or a Dark Seal, and you get your runes and Sorcery Domination. And with 30 AP at the beginning of the game, you definitely have a somewhat meaningful cut in your damage output. In fact, a 13% cut to your early wave clear. That's really substantial. That definitely matters. His early game is absolutely weaker. The cooldown is obviously worse. The damage is obviously worse. Oh, baby. By the end of the game, this becomes, at 300 AP, it's only a 4% damage cut, and at 1000 AP and the hyper end game, it's a 2% damage cut. So by the end of it all, it won't really matter, but this is absolutely a meaningful hit to his early game. The base damage down by 10 absolutely matters. The cooldown buff from before got reverted. It's back to 7.5 to 2.5 instead of 5.5 to 2.5. Here's that number once again. It's, again, the opposite of what it had before. Yep, back to having much weaker early wave clear. He could use the nerf. I think overall, Swain will still land at an above 50% win rate in solo queue and will remain pro viable. Absolutely, I believe that. All right, small bug fix to Warwick's queue. Cool, whatever. Technically, this is a nerf, but YOLO. Small buff to Zed damage. Damage to units beyond the first, meaning his wave clear, meaning hitting things behind minions, is 20% stronger than before. Cool. And once again, they're saying the Duskblade update hit Zed harder than expected. If you watch my patch rundown, I was pretty unconvinced Zed was going to gain anything. And turns out I was right. Zed's at about 49. Okay, he's at 49.9% win rate in solo queue. Like, Zed doesn't have to go up or down in power. And as far as his mastery sort of curve is concerned, he's pretty much at the midpoint. He's number 22 for mid laners of like most mastered champions according to Champion GG. So Zed is like a pretty fairly splashed champion at a fairly fair win rate. I don't mind this buff. This is fine to me. Zed will be slightly strong afterwards, but like not broken, not OP, and certainly not weak either. Zed mains, your champion's not being propped up by Zed mains. Your champion is fun to play and other people like playing it, and he does fine. Zed is fine. That's where Zed is. He's fine. All right, nerf to Ginsu's Rage Blade. I've played not a ton of ranked since new Ginsu's came out. I've played a lot of normals though. I didn't really see Ginsu's super taking over games like mad hardcore. I look at like Kog'Maw and Varus win rates. As Rage Blade first item seems the same. I didn't really look at Kayle very much or Master Yi very much. Maybe they kind of went up and down a little bit. I know it's a really popular item to buy on Jhin, and that's kind of okay. I mean, the thing is, Jhin is still at a 47% win rate in solo queue. Like, people are probably building him a bit wrong and screwing up. Like, I think people are kind of jumping on a Jhin saying, oh, this Rage Blade thing, and just not getting there. This item doesn't seem terribly problematic for what I'm seeing, but I could be missing something entirely and not seeing the forest for the trees or vice versa. But also, yeah, it's probably a bit efficient, so 300 gold more, the price seems okay. I don't have strong opinions. I think this is the right choice, though. People in the community seem to think it's a good choice as well, so cool. Next up, massive FU nerfs to Locket of the Iron Solari. Bale shooting down, shielding per level going down, bonus health ratio in practice also going down, cooldown getting worse, multiple shield reduction, which is if a second person puts another Locket shield on within this window that has also grown. It is now half as good as even it was before. Here is the table of buffs. Also, keep in mind, I mislabeled this. It's not duration. It is durability or shield value. Basically, Locket does 30% less shielding than before. Also, because you can't buy this item before level 6 in any reliable way at all, I chose to start the numbers here at level 6. And though the health ratio is technically a bit better at level 6, 7, 8, and 9, the amount of bonus health you must have in order to make it stronger than before is untenable. What level 6 champion has 2 Giant's Belts and a Locket? That answer is none of them. Locket can never be stronger than before, and the ratio eventually decays down to almost half as good. Locket is definitely weaker. Definitely weaker. Which I'm happy about. Locket was a basically mandatory item. We actually did start seeing it less, though. I was noticing, watching pro games more recently, supports really wanted to go Zeke's Harbinger, or junglers did. Locket was occasionally hard to fit into the build. It was coming in very, very late into people's inventories. At this point, there's a decent chance of people to stop buying Locket, and we just keep seeing more Knight's Vow, more Zeke's Convergence, not Harbinger, that was the old version, more Zeke's Convergence, and more redemptions and whatnot instead of Lockets. I think Locket might actually disappear from pro play because this is probably a big enough nerf where they will just pick the other items up instead, and you only get so much money, so you just won't ever have room for this item in your build. That's my read, actually. I think Locket might disappear from pro. Which unless you're like specifically against like a Karthus or something where you're like, no, this is the best item in the game. Which I think is exactly what the goals were in the first place. There are a lot of prototypes for Locket remakes that never came out into public or never really happened. And in fact, there still might be another prototype Locket that comes out on PvE at some point. But the goal of the item being, hey, it should be situational. Much like Lash Whisper is a situational item, and Void Staff is a situational item. Great. Locket is not ubiquitously good enough anymore. Locket is good when you know you're getting full value, and I'm very happy about that. Love this change. I think the numbers are accurate for this being a good item. Next up, Ninja Tabby, and we're going to play a game with this one, okay? Ninja Tabby lost 10 armor, right here, and gained 2% basic attack damage reduction. Whoops, my mic moved. I want you all to guess. Where's the break point? Right? Obviously, getting 10 less armor nerfs the item, and then getting 2% more damage reduction buffs the item. And as we can kind of understand, the more armor you have, the less that 30 or 20 or 10 armor matters, right? Going from 0 to 10 armor is a big deal. Going from 5,000 to 10 armor, pretty meaningless, right? But regardless of your armor, going from 10 to 12% damage reduction means a lot. So the question that I have for you guys is, how much armor do you have to have before buying new Ninja Tabby is better than buying old Ninja Tabby against auto attacks? How much armor do you have to have before buying Ninja Tabby for this to be a buff? What do you think the numbers are? And then second, as you mull that over, how much armor is this worth generally? About how much armor? Like if you could convert the 20 armor into 24% or vice versa, would you? All right, question number 1. Ninja Tabby, damage taken from physical damage auto attacks. My base armor here, and I buy Ninja Tabby in 8.6, I buy Ninja Tabby in 8.7. If I had 320 armor before buying Ninja Tabby, it is now the same item against Caitlyn's auto attacks. If I had more than that, it's better. If I had less than that, it's worse. And keep in mind, this is the most generous possible circumstance, which is auto attack damage only. It is obviously weaker against Zed, and Kha'Zix, and Talon, and Kayn, and Shaco. Well, okay, Shaco's physical damage is almost entirely from auto attacks, but there's some. That's the numbers. Next, how much armor do you think that's worth in the case of specifically dealing with auto attacks? And here's this number right here. The more armor you have, the more armor this is worth. 12%, right? So basically this is, okay, I had 40 armor, and I gained 20, and then I gained 12% damage reduction. And as my damage taken goes down and down and down, here is how much more armor that 12% reduction was worth. So at 40 armor, that 12% is still worth 22 armor worth of auto attack damage reduction. And if I'm super endgame at 300 armor, it's worth 57 armor worth of physical auto attack damage reduction. Now that 57 armor is unaffected by Black Cleaver. It is unaffected by Last Whisper, so it's better than that. But there you go. There's the numbers. One other thing I did is I looked at item math and said, how efficient are these items? Now, full disclosure, there are only 2 sources of flat magic pen in the game, Sorcerer's Shoes and Oblivion Orb. You pay about the same amount of money for the magic pen in each case, so I'm really basically using Sorcerer's Shoes to deduce how much money Sorcerer's Shoes is worth. It's a pretty hollow point to make, but it exists right here. So I said, okay, here's the value of the move speed the item gives. Here's the value of the stat it gives. Lucidity gives cooldown reduction. Berserker gives attack speed. Sorcerer's Shoes gives magic pen. Merchandise gives MR. And Ninja gives armor. And I said, okay, do you have a unique passive? And how much is it worth? I want to point out that you're paying 110 gold for the Mercury Ted Tenacity. And you're paying 160 gold for the Ninja Tabby unique passive. As we know from here, even in the worst of scenarios, the damage reduction is worth 21 or so armor, which is worth 200 gold or so. But it's 200 gold only against physical damage auto attacks. Which means, as we kind of look at this, right, if you're dying to Zed, and you had 100 armor somehow, like you actually went Guardian Angel on Ashe, and you're deciding if you want to buy Ninja Tabby or not. It's like, well, you can buy Ninja Tabby, and you can get 30 armor worth of damage reduction from the unique passive. Which, hey, that's like 600 gold. Okay, but how much of your damage is actually coming from auto attacks? Because you're still paying 160 gold of your real money for that stat. At a certain point, you go, actually, nah. So there's some math for you. Cool. Ultimately, yep, this is a strict nerf to Ninja Tabby. Even in some of the most generous of scenarios, it's a weaker item now. I think it's fine. All right, aura items. Basically, you can't become bigger than the items. The context center describes it pretty well. Based on my knowledge of how this was implemented, it snapshots your champion's size at game start and says if your size increases, will increase the aura radius's size as well. Frozen Heart specifically was good enough to not have to be affected. But yep, Sunfire Cape gets better, Abyssal Mask gets better, and Righteous Glory gets better on champions that get bigger in size, which is basically Elixir of Iron and Cho'Gath. And Lulu R and things like that. This doesn't mean a whole bunch, but hey, that'll feel nice that your Sunfire Capes are better. Congratulations. I will talk about this more later. I think they screwed up with this one. They're saying Relic Shield is overperforming compared to other support items. And maybe a different designer worked on this than something else later in the patch, but this doesn't end up being a nerf at all. So forget all of this for now. It doesn't matter. We'll move on. All right, Resolve's health is now health per level instead of flat health at level 1. I ran some math on that real quick. I chose Riven as an example. Let's say you go Chrysalis and Bone Plating as a Riven on secondary. Here's how much health you had in 8.6 compared to 8.7. The breakpoint is level 9, which is not of surprise to pretty much anyone. But as far as your actual health is concerned, it's a pretty substantial cut. It's an 8% health cut, even for a moderately tanky champion like Riven, with like a 500-something base health. Now, this gets further deflated if you go things like a Doran's Blade or a Doran's Shield or a Relic Shield, etc. But for longsword starts, you'll feel it a bit more. Honestly, in some cases, nah, you can't really consider this a buff. It's not really fair to consider this a buff in almost any case. Okay, Resolve champions are less tanky in the early game. Should not have any very major game-wide impact, in my opinion. Next up, they remade Mana Flow Band, and I think this is actually a pretty good remake. So Mana Flow Band before, on a 75-second cooldown, which is 5 times this new cooldown, you refunded the spell you cast and refunded 8% of your missing mana. So let's talk about hitting enemy champion with spells grants 25 max mana up to 10 times. Well, if you can land it every single time on cooldown, this takes 2.5 minutes. You can do it 4 times a minute, and you can do it 10 times. If you land it once per wave, it's done in 5 minutes. If you land it once every other wave, it's done in 10 minutes. It is pretty easy to finish this quest early on in the game. Once you finish the quest, you get 250 mana. And that's pretty good. 250 mana is worth 7.5 ability power for an Archangel's user. And in general, just is more max mana, which is just nice to have, because this basically means it's 2 free spells every recall or every time you go back to max mana. So that seems pretty good, right? When you complete the quest, it is 2 free spells every time, which would take you 2.5 minutes normally. So that seems pretty good. Next up is the actual regeneration that this gives you. This is 1% of your missing mana every 5 seconds, compared to 8% missing mana every 75 seconds. Well, if we did the math, this is equivalent to 8% missing mana every 40, instead of 8% missing every 75. So the regen is twice as good. The max mana suddenly exists when it didn't before, and it's essentially worth 2 free spells. This is basically a Mana Flow Band buff, while also feeling really good. Like, this looks fun on paper. What's funny is people are going to read this patch note on paper and not know if it's a buff or a nerf. It's totally a buff. I'm sure there are cases where it is not a buff, such as if you could make it somehow always refund a max charge Cassidon R. Sure, not a buff in that case. But it's 250 max mana, which is damage on a Cassidon R. At a certain point, it's just a better ability. So Mana Flow Band is a lot stronger. What's also nice is it's now usable on champions like Singed, who just never got to use Mana Flow Band well. I think it's a hard buff to Muramana users because they will get way more mana regen back and weren't spending that much mana on their individual Qs and whatnot anyway. This feels like a really big deal. This is going to be super sick, and Archangel's users are going to be really happy. Next up, a remake on Presence of Mind. And again, I think it's a very well done update where this looks really fun on paper, and I'm excited about it. All right. Instead of 7 seconds of infinite mana refunds after leveling up or getting a takedown, it is takedown only, and it refunds 20% of your max mana plus 10% of your ultimate's cooldown. Now, I don't know if the ulti cooldown refund is max cooldown or current cooldown. I didn't spend the time to look. If it's of max cooldown, you have a chance of getting 2 ults off in a fight for a lot of low ultimate cooldown champions, such as Lux. If it's current, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But generally speaking, most champions aren't going to now be able to ult a second time when they wouldn't before. There are going to be cases, but I think it's not that insanely frequent. Exception being if you're doing really, really well with Zed assassinations. And Zed wouldn't go Presence of Mind. Skarner maybe, but Skarner also doesn't want to go Presence of Mind. You kind of have to want the mana. And 20% max mana is certainly really, really nice. This gives them Merlinomicon passive back to someone like Kassadin, who never quite got to buy Merlinomicon in the old patches, and now is going to run Presence of Mind like for sure every time now. It's going to feel really good on ARAM, of course. This will probably be, this will definitely be less mana in laning phase. This is so much less infinite mana levels 1 through 6. It's substantial. It's super meaningful. But it is going to be a ton of power in team fights. And Mage is going to feel really, really good in extended team fights because they will have mana for sure. This is the kind of thing that also you would really want to consider running on Ezreal. Because Ezreal uses his current mana pool as a DPS stat, right? He's using Muramana. He will spend his mana dealing damage, then get mana back and be back on a high level of mana and deal more damage. I probably expect to see Presence of Mind on someone like Ezreal and any other Muramana user. And again, this is a pretty fun rune. I think it's more fun than old Presence of Mind, so I'm pretty happy about this being really cool. What other thing I'm going to bring up as a Kassadin aficionado myself is old Kassadin definitely felt really good getting to get free Rift Walks for 7 seconds during a team fight. And if you went Archangel Staff, which you did, you would then also refund 25% of the cost of it back because the two effects would stack and you'd actually print mana after getting a kill. And you can make the argument that it is a bit worse for Kassadin, but I think it's still a very strong one, and he'll feel happy about this. Next up, buffs to Legend Tenacity. 20 Tenacity becomes 30 Tenacity. That feels pretty good. Cool. It's going to feel most great for Juggernauts. Withstand tanks. They'll be happy. Cut down some minor buffs. 4th to 10 becomes 4th to 12% bonus damage. Here's the damage amp right here. Health difference on the left-hand side. True actual damage increase on the right. It's about 2% better at max rank at 2,000 health difference. This is a, right, at a pretty big 1,000 health difference, you're doing 1% more damage than before. It is not massive. It is not huge. It exists. It probably gets to the point where you've got a real choice now when you're playing a duo lane marksman or a duo lane damage dealer. There is an increased chance that this is now the better choice over coup de grace. It's now a closer fight, so I think it's a good thing. Nerfs to Zombie Ward I'm very happy about. Zombie Ward definitely, at a certain point, probably just go away. I feel like Zombie Ward should get replaced at a certain point. But more nerfs. The duration down quite a lot. It's going to be actually flat in the first 4 levels. Scale up over time. So here's Zombie Ward by itself. The duration of the ward is much shorter in the early game. And this level 4, where it's 3 instead of 81, is substantial. When you put a control ward down to kill something off, this is really quite a big deal. It scales back up to only being 2/3 as good. And then if you have it after Yellow Trinket, because zombie wards spawn off of your own wards, your ward duration is down quite a bit as well, to the tune of 25 to 33 to 20% by the end of the game. Again, definitely a bit too strong in my opinion as a rune, and glad it's getting nerfed. Small approach velocity buff, I should say. Cool. I always like the idea of approach velocity being good on someone like Ashe. Now maybe it actually is, and that's a cool thing. Yay, approach velocity. Tooltip update to absolute focus. That's kind of nice as well. And now we get to the point where I was going to talk about Relic Shield. Okay, so melee minions are worth a bit more gold, but eventually worth less later on in the game. There's this chart. At 13.5 minutes, they are worth the same amount. Later on in the game, they are worth less, but hey, they're worth more in the early game. So in your first couple of waves, you're getting a bit more gold out of melee minions. Cool. Cast minions, worth a whole lot less. And I find this interesting for a couple of different reasons. So one, melee minions tend to be easier to last hit under turret. They don't require priming. You almost always are able to kill them with a single auto attack. In a lot of cases. There are some cases where you can't if you didn't get enough attack damage. You have to play around that sometimes, but generally speaking, melee minions are easier to last hit under turret, and they're worth more gold. Cast minions are actually harder to last hit under turret because they almost always require 2 auto attacks. However, cast minions are also very easy to wave clear later on in the game. And so now they're worth 14 gold flat instead of 17 plus scaling. Like a level 7 Victor always one-shots every caster minion with an augment. Doesn't do that anymore. And so caster minions are worth quite a bit less gold. They used to be worth up to 20 gold and then beyond, once you got to sort of mid to late game. And it's a meaningful 18 to 30% decrease in how much gold they're worth. And so the types of minions you're good at killing has changed. And gold is generally down for these cases. But siege minions are worth a crap ton more. Their base value is 1/3 higher, and their growth is substantially increased to the order of magnitude of 10x. Their health is up. Their health increases up quite a bit as well. Super minions are going to match that because duh. Holy moly, what does this mean for siege minions? Well, here's a giant table of the gold value of a siege minion. Holy crap, yes, 129 gold per minion. Unless my math is wrong, I don't believe it is, 60 gold. Every minute and a half, it goes up by 3. So 60, 63, 66, up and up and up. And yes, cannons are worth more than 100 gold pretty early on into the game. 22 and a half minutes. Most games do not end before 22 and a half, and they're worth 100 gold apiece. Holy moly, siege minions are worth a lot of gold now. Wow. That is a gigantic increase in gold income. And as far as their health scaling is concerned, here's the numbers right there. 9% in the early game, up to about 50% by mid to late game. So you have massively increased value, substantially increased health, siege minions. Now, real quick, for those who haven't cheated yet and looked further down in the Imager document or haven't looked online elsewhere, is this a buff or nerf to minion farm? And if it changes, when? The answer is, it actually gets obnoxiously better. Okay, obnoxious is too strong of a term. It gets way better by endgame. All right, it starts out 99%. All right, the first 3 waves are worth 3 less gold. And the next 3 waves are worth 3 less gold. And the next 3 waves are worth 2 less gold. Honestly, who cares? Okay, fine. But, there's more to happen here. These are all the same numbers. And I think this is the expectation. It's the same numbers. We're fine. We got it. We're good to go. What's this? Why does it go from 10 to 113? Or 100 to 113? Because at 20 minutes in the game, instead of siege minions spawning every 3rd wave, they spawn every other wave. And so these 100 gold value gold bags now spawn 50% more often. Okay. Wow. Lots more gold income coming in now. Yes, there is. Wait, what is this? Is this a typo? Nope. Once you cross 35 minutes into the game, siege minions spawn every single wave. So now, that 130 ridiculous gold minion that's in there, every wave. So there's substantial gold income differences. Now, I'm getting my information from the League of Legends wiki. There are inaccuracies in that wiki, but assuming it is accurate, and I do believe it is, late game has a crap ton more gold income coming in. I mean, a lot more gold income coming in. And let's go back to that Relic Shield thing we talked about before. Where the Relic Shield and then Targon's Brace lost some gold income. It was worth less money, less money, less money. It was right here, sorry. This is the passive loss column. And in fact, by the end of the game, by the average end of a game at 33, 34 minutes, you would lose 500 gold worth of that. Wow, that's pretty meaningful. I said, okay, well, you get that back with cannon minions. You get it back, you get it back, you get it back. Every minute and a half, you execute a cannon minion, you get it back. You get it back, you get it back. And what's funny is I didn't even account for the fact that now that we're here in this part, you're going to start spawning, plus 47, plus 49, plus 52, plus 65. Maybe I did start counting it. Plus, anyway, either way, you're losing gold, losing gold, losing gold. More and more cannon minions start spawning. More and more cannon minions start spawning. As time goes on, you get even more gold out of this one. tank supports are actually going to make more money than before, even though Relic Shield itself got nerfed. Now this requires that the support does a good job in last hitting. They have to actually use their stacks and get to cannons and actually last hit them and do a good job with that. If they screw up, life is pain. But if they do a reasonably good job last hitting cannons, income. So tank supports are even better in 8.7. I still think, and actually increasingly now think, Threshes should not go Relic Shield because it is so hard to last hit minions with Relic Shield on Thresh in the end game when wave clear happens super fast, and you get even less passive gold generation. You will be broke on Thresh. Just go coin. Also, if you miss the siege minion, you are denying so much gold to your teammates that they will irrevocably hate you forever. Don't do it. Other minor updates. Red buff no longer deals damage to turrets, which is going to help first turrets not fall quite as fast. This is a very slight anti-snowball. Attack move on cursor checks a slightly larger area. That's kind of nice. Automatic AFK detection for voice chat is a very good thing. I'm glad that's coming in. A bunch of bug fixes that I don't really want to read through because they're mostly pretty minor. A couple of brain. A couple of cool changes coming in for this. We've got a Rebel skin, got a Wukong skin. We've got everything is fine Soraka with the Cup of Joe. I like these emotes. You can now buy cosmetic-only Hextech chests. That's pretty cool as well. And that's going to do it for me. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you all greatly as people, as viewers, as everything. If you have comments, leave them on my Twitter, leave them on the YouTube channel, whatever you want to do. Thanks, and goodbye.